First, I'll tell you the Bible story. Abram and Lot. If I slip up and say Abraham tonight, it's okay. That's his name later, but it's Abram in the story. And of course, this is Genesis 13, and Genesis 12 was the big beginning of the life of Abraham, or Abram, if you will. I'll say it over and over again, probably. But God said, "Get thee from thy country and from thy kindred, and get thee unto the land that I shall show thee." And Abram was in Ur of the Chaldees. Now, Ur of the Chaldees is modern-day Iraq. It was about 500 miles away from where he should have been. It is Babylon area, if you will. And so that's a long ways that God said, "I want to send you to the land of Canaan, and I want you to develop the land there. I want you to go to that land that turned out to be the land of Israel, the land that flowed with milk and honey." God had a special plan for Abraham, and as he started out there in Genesis 12. Now, many of you know the story. Immediately, Abram did something that he should not have done. God said, "Get thee from thy country and from thy kindred." But he only partially obeyed, didn't he? And he brought his nephew Lot with him. And any kind of a partial disobedience brings problems. God always wants complete and full obedience from his children. Now, God will help us through when we make mistakes and when we try our best to obey, or we're trying to do it right. And God will give us grace, and God will forgive us when we sin even. Let's just say it the way it is. But there's always going to be some kind of repercussion for the sin. And so we see that here. That's the first thing that comes to my mind as I read the story, that they're now in the land, and God is blessing them. But God's blessing them so much that their wealth is getting in their way. Oftentimes that's the case with all people. Wealth gets in the way of relationships. We should never make a decision in this life based on money. Never. But we all do. And we do on a regular basis sometimes. We decide based on how much it's going to cost. Now that doesn't sound bad. When we say don't make decisions based on money, we're usually talking about something a little more, little bigger than that, like a move, or something that'll take you away from your local church, or take you away from serving God in some way, or take you away from those that can help you when you need help. And all of those things are intertwined. Now, they had a wealth problem. As soon as they had a wealth problem, they had a people problem. And you know, there's nothing wrong with having money, nothing wrong with being wealthy. And some people can handle it, and some people can't handle it. Most of us, the reason we don't have the wealth is because we probably couldn't handle it if we had it. Let's just be honest about it. That's probably why. Now, some is not the case, but some it is. In the case here, Lot and Abram have strife. And it really wasn't Lot and Abram themselves, it was their herdmen that were with them. And so let's just be frank and blunt about it. And so as they had this strife, Abram was a very gracious man. I often said about Adrian Lindsay, he's a very gracious person. You could say about anything that he disagreed with, he wouldn't let you know that he had disagreed with you. I said, somebody asked me an opinion about him, one of his employers. And I said, well, let me tell you what I think about Adrian Lindsay. I said, if you pulled up and you parked your car on his foot, he would look at you and he would say, when you have a moment, if you have time, if you're not busy doing something else, would you maybe back up just a few inches in order to pull his crushed foot out from under your car? And that was true. I think Abram was that kind of a person. And I don't mean to be too personal, bringing people's names into the message tonight, but this is the kind of story that you just read about. Abram, he's the one, he's the uncle, he's the authority, he's the older man, the elder that ought to have the respect of the younger, but he gives way. He gives his say to Lot and says, look, the whole land is before us. And the theme of it all, almost was my title, is let there be no strife. Let there be no strife. Well, what a good theme for our lives. Let there be no strife. A theme of life to let there be no strife. Abram looked at Lot and said, let there be no strife. He said, the whole land is before us. Why don't you choose? If you choose the left side, that's your left, right? And if you choose the left side, I'll choose the right. If you choose the right, I'll choose the left. And whichever way you go, I'll go the other way. And Lot looked out. And now most preachers right here will talk about Lot seeing Sodom and Gomorrah. There's nothing in the Bible to make us believe that Lot knew what Sodom and Gomorrah was. The only thing that we see here is that he saw the well-watered plains. He saw a good place for his cattle. He saw a place where he could take them, not have to work hard to dig a well and to make the water come to him. He could just take the flocks right to the water, and it's a whole lot easier to take care of them that way. If you have a herd of cattle and there's a stream that goes by your field, you're very blessed because they can just take care of that need all by themselves. If you ever had to haul water for animals or pump it out of a well, you know what a chore that is, and it's a daily thing that always has to be cared for, and the troughs have to be cleaned. And so the story is that Lot chose the well-watered plains of Jordan, and there was peace. Now there's a story here, and there's a truth here that I think is important enough to bring out tonight, and the wisdom that God gave to Abram to take care of a problem. It's so practical. It's so simple. Now let me give you my story. We were in Indiana at the time, going to Bible college. We had just got there. Paul was born. My wife was 3 months along with him when we left Denver, Colorado, and got in the little budget rented truck and towed our car behind it and headed off across I-80 to Chicago, Illinois area. When we got there, we stayed for a while, as you heard me say, with my cousin. And finally, without giving you too many details, we found a place to rent down in Lowell, Indiana. About an hour's travel to church. It was the best place we could find on a short notice, and that was almost a month. And we had all kinds of roadblocks and obstacles in our way, but we finally found this place. And it was an old farmhouse, and we were out in the middle of nowhere. And there's 160 acres of corn on all four sides of us before you got to the first house. We were out in nowhere. But it was cheap, and it was able to be rented, so we rented it. Not very long after we were there was a couple that we went to college with that had trouble. They were more in the city, and they couldn't afford their rent. And we made what we learned later was probably a pretty grave mistake. And we invited them to come and stay with us as a young couple. And they had a couple children, if I recall. I can't remember for sure. Maybe they didn't have their children yet. But their names were John and Patty. And I won't tell you any more than that, for sake that someone may get this and know what I'm talking about. Their names were John and Patty. They stayed with us. Now it's hard for anybody to stay with somebody else. If you love them and you're married to them and you would give your life for them, you stay with them, you learn everything that irritates you about them and of you that irritates them. That's just a fact of life. All of us would do well to just recognize that fact. There's something about you that's irritating to somebody. There's something about me that's irritating to somebody. Now, I don't know who that somebody is. I've never met them. I've never been irritated. I'm just a lovable little fuzzball, but I'm sure that there's something about me that irritates probably everybody in this room, just a little bit, if not a whole lot. Now, what are we going to do about this? What are we going to do about this? So we stayed with this other couple. One of those things that happened involved Brother Paul. And Brother Paul was little baby Paul at the time. He was just a year old, I'm guessing, if that. And one day I was at work and John was at work and the ladies were there alone with the children. And Paul, little baby Paul, went over to the coffee table. And I forget if it was a vase. Mom could probably tell us the details. She remembers things like that. But there was something that you weren't supposed to touch. And Mom was all about training, and she trained Paul. I tell you, she worked with Paul, and Paul was no easy one to train. I know you don't think of Paul as being strongly opinionated and kind of stubborn. You would never think of that about him today. But back in the day, when he was just a year or so old, he was very stubborn, very opinionated. And so he went to grab whatever that object was. I'll say it's a vase for the sake of the story. And he went to grab this thing, and it's going to hurt him if it breaks, and of course, it's probably not going to do too good to the vase. And so Mrs. Arkola, Mama, spoke up and said, "No, Paul." And his little chubby little hand, I still see it in my mind today because I saw that so many times. He'd put that hand out to touch something, and one of us would say, "No, Paul," and he'd put that little hand back like this. He'd put it back like he's about to pull a pistol out of his side. You know, that says a lot. But anyway, he'd pull, and I could tell, anyway, never mind, we'll leave those stories alone. But he'd pull that back like that, and he'd hold it there. And the reason he's holding it there is because he don't want that thing spanked. He knows that when we say no, he's not to touch. And so he held it there for a moment, but just like all gunfighters of the old Wild West, it didn't take him long to draw again. And he put the little hand out there. And Mama said, "No, Paul." And he thought Mom and Miss Patty were distracted and he could try one more. And so "No, Paul," and he pulled it back. This happened 2 or 3 times until Patty got up. She walked over there, and this is the title of my message, "Let's Just Remove the Temptation." And she picked up the vase and put it up on a shelf away from Paul. Your mom did not do well with that situation. Now, she did perfectly with the situation, but that didn't hit well with her. That's what I mean by that statement. So Mrs. Arkola said, "Oh, no, 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 no." And she grabbed that vase from Patty and put it right back in the middle where Paul could reach it and said, "We're not here to change everything about our lives. We're here to train a little boy." And she put that, and she really taught her a practical lesson. You train the child. Now, there's some common sense to not put things that a child could hurt himself on, especially if you're not there to watch them all the time. I get that. I don't remember. She'll tell you it probably wasn't something that would hurt him or something dangerous to him. I don't remember. I'm using the subject of or the object of a vase, and that sounds like that's part of our fault. I get that, but I don't think that's what it was. But anyway, you get the point. So, with that in mind, let's look at something very practical to every one of our lives tonight. Again, just a simple message. Won't keep you long, but very helpful. Why is this story in the Bible? I see these same principles tonight. I see 2 men that had some strife among them, or a whole bunch of men. Two groups of herdmen that had strife between them. And I see a biblical answer to that strife. I don't think this passage is in here just for grins, and there's nothing like that in the whole Bible. God could put anything in here. This was decided before the foundation of the world. "Forever, O Lord, thy word is settled in heaven." These words were decided what would be here to teach us. God could have put all kinds of details. He put these in here. They must be important for some reason. And I think one of the things that I see tonight is the fact that sometimes there's strife. Would anybody tonight be able to raise your hand and say there's never been any strife between you and any other person in this world? None of us could. Eric raised his, and of course Dad put his hand down. There's strife right there, right? About to be some. But he's 5, so give him a break. But Abraham said, and I quote, "Let there be no strife." My title tonight is "Just Remove the Temptation." Or no. Or no. You decide with me tonight. What's best? To remove the temptation or no? Think about it with me. In Romans 16, I'll help you with your decision. In verse 17, and you don't have to turn there, I'll quote it to you. "Now I beseech you, brethren, mark them which cause divisions and offenses contrary to the doctrine which ye have learned, and avoid them." I've had different folks bring things up to me over the years, and they've asked me, and most of the time respectfully, why don't you do something about this? And they don't say it like that because that doesn't sound very respectful, you know. And I don't have any kind of feeling that it was disrespectful that anybody's ever asked me something like that. But an honest, simple question. There's problems. So-and-so comes to the church and they're causing problems. They're running people off. Well, what should we do? Should we remove the temptation? Or should we train the children? Which one? The Bible says here, mark them. Two things about that person. Mark them, which cause divisions and offenses contrary to the doctrine which you have learned. And the second one, and avoid them. Avoid what is the question? Avoid the divisions and the offenses, or avoid the people? That I don't have a for certain answer, but I will say this, probably both. Probably both. Now let's talk just for a moment, and I don't have a whole lot of preach at you tonight, or for you. I don't preach at you, I preach for you. But people that are assembled together here, we're here for at least 3 times a week. I was speaking to a guy the other day, and he says, I've been to your church on a Wednesday. He says, you probably have a whole bunch more on Sunday. I said, well, sometimes. I said, but we have a crowd that comes Sunday morning, Sunday night, and Wednesday night. I said, we always have had. And I'm so grateful for it. I'm just honored that that's the case. That something draws everybody back 3 times a week. And that's how it should be, but that's not how it is in most places. Most places have a Sunday morning crowd 3 or 4 times the size of a Wednesday night crowd. But 3 times a week minimum, we're together. Somebody said this, familiarity breeds what? Contempt. Contempt. All the time. The more familiar I am with you, the more apt it is for us to have some trouble somewhere along the way. I learn something about you that irritates me. And every time I hear it, I'm going to answer it, right? If I'm any way at all, quick-tempered, or if I'm any way at all, impatient, if I have ill manners, I'll say things I shouldn't say because it irritates me. And we're all about ourselves. Most everybody in this room is about ourselves. And the Bible says we are. Don't take that as an insult. The Bible says, no man yet hateth his own flesh, but nourisheth and cherisheth it. We take care of ourselves. When we hurt, we grab that spot. That hurts, and we rub it. And when we're sore, we'll move that joint around, and we'll do something because we care about our flesh. We don't want to hurt. When we step on that nail, we will usually pull our foot back off of it because that hurts for it to stay there, Melody. And so these are things that just simply make sense. But familiarity breeds contempt, and we see a problem, and we are irritated by that problem. We have a couple answers from the Bible. Mark them and avoid them. Mark the person? Yeah. Mark the person. If there's somebody you know that you work with, that every time you're around them, they cause trouble for you, you don't get along with them, it's a real good idea for you to mark that. And what are you marking exactly? It says mark them, but what are you marking about them? You may be marking about them when you bring up politics. You have a problem with this person. When you bring up religion, folks say politics and religion, those are the big fire setters, right? Those are the big fire starters. Don't talk about that with certain people. I'm just using these as examples. But when you know this about a person, mark that. Mark that down. Mark it in your memory. Mark it in a piece of paper if you have to remind yourself. But then you avoid that. God is for us removing the temptation. Now, let's back up. If Abram had completely obeyed God, this never would have been a problem, would it? Lot wouldn't have been there. Lot would have been back in Ur of the Chaldees, and Lot could have been blessed by God, and Lot could have had all the room they needed, perhaps. I don't know. But this problem would have never come up between Abram and Lot because Lot wouldn't have been there. And I'll say again, I think the best answer to problems is let's stop causing the problem. Mark them and avoid them. That's an after effect. That's an after effect. That's something that there's nothing we can do about it anymore. That's where here you have a grown adult that's going to say what they're going to say, and there's nothing illegal about them saying it. Free country and all that. And so we've got to mark them and avoid them because it's important to God, obviously, at least in the Old Testament and New Testament, that's pretty much part of the whole Bible, that we don't have offenses and strife one between another.
That's right.
That just makes sense. We ought to get along with one another. Now, a couple of thoughts. Number one, do not rely on doing better. Do not rely on doing better. Well, I can handle it. I'll do better next time. You may, but experience teaches us that that's probably not the answer. Did Abram say, let's see if this is going to keep going or not? Maybe Abram did. Maybe we don't know about that. But what we do know, and God put in our Bibles, is that when Abraham learned of the strife, he said, let there be no strife. And he took measures to cause this not to continue. Now, wish that we could just train the children. Wish we could say, no, Paul. Wish we could say, no, brother so-and-so. No, sister so-and-so. And we could correct the problem. Sometimes we have to remove the problem.
Right.
That's not what we want to happen. We want to avoid that, but not at all costs. Do not rely on doing better, especially is this true in the case of adults. You see, fire and gasoline will always explode when they're united. You cannot get fire next to gasoline. If anybody didn't learn that, they should have been here a couple harvest parties ago when our fellows were out there trying to ignite the bonfire. And boy, it was just one of us after another. I was the first one. Brother Paul was the second one. I think Donnie was the third one. Brother Mike was in there trying to light the fire. And we were running strings of fuel over to it. And Andrew was in there. And we just about burned the place down. But we got a bonfire going sooner or later, didn't we? And we all know you can't put fire and gasoline together.
Yeah,
you can't mix oil and water.
Right.
Now now it gets a little bit cheesy, doesn't it? You can mix oil and water, preacher. You can try.
Right.
Oil will say, I'll mix with the water. And water will say, I'll take that oil on. But let them alone for a little while. And what happens? They'll separate.
Yep.
One will rise to the top, and that oil will float there on top of the water. You see, there's certain things that should not be together. And don't take this sermon to the nth degree about everything in life or anything. I'm trying to teach a principle here tonight. There's some things that we need to mark and we need to avoid. And just common sense, we can solve a whole lot of problems where there's strife.
Yes, sir.
I've been here for 20 years and there's been 20 years of strife somewhere. This person, that person, the strife. But the problem is that the strife goes away by the strife going away. I don't like it when the strife goes away. I'd like to help the strife to cease. I'd like for us to be able to learn how to all together handle the strife. It's usually best for other measures to be taken rather than to mix fire and gasoline or oil and water. Number 2, discover what it is about you that irritates your friend and what it is about your friend that irritates you. Now, did you catch that order? I said that on purpose. I want to know first, I want to fix me, not them. I learned this early in my marriage, and it's a good thing. And my wife learned it as well, and it's a good thing. And I don't want to take any glory for it. If we have a good marriage, if we have good children, it's not my fault. You've heard me say that before. But I mean what I say. Find out what is about you that irritates others. Now, you know what it is. You know because sometimes folks tell you what it is. Now, the best thing in the world is for you to be trained. Be trained by what's acceptable to people and what's irritating to people. And fix it. Don't make excuses. Don't come up with all these. Can you imagine little brother Paul, the 1-year-old brother Paul saying, but it's something I just want to do. But you know what? I felt like I needed to touch something today, and I'm tired today, and I didn't get all my sleep in my crib last night. And I just got to touch something. And can you imagine that kind of excuse? That's as crazy as some of the excuses we use. Well, I had a hard day. Well, if you had a hard day, know that about yourself and avoid people.
Sure.
Don't get around, and listen, I respect that about people. It says, I have a headache. I hear that loud and clear. When someone has a headache, when someone's had a bad day, man, they have the plague. And I don't want to get it from them. I don't want to get their bad spirit. I don't want to get their pain. Now, I'll be empathetic, and I'll share it with them. And I've prayed and asked God to help me share the pain of people. And I know what that's like. I don't mean that at all the wrong way. But I understand that you avoid things like that because I don't want that to be a problem between me and that person. If Katie comes in and she says, Dad, I don't want to talk about it. Well, what do I say? I always say the same thing. Yes, beloved. No, I usually say, talk about what? And I stir the pot a little bit. But seriously, the best thing we could do if somebody don't want to talk about it, guess what? Don't talk about it. Maybe another time. Let there be no strife. This is such a simple message, but it's something that will cause strife and division. It'll cause offenses, and we can mark it and avoid them. The Bible doesn't say there to avoid them by crucifying them, by taking them out back of the church and stoning them, by excommunicating people over it. There's things about all that in the Scripture, but this isn't one of them. It's offenses and divisions that are caused that blow up in a church, and people stop coming. And listen, sometimes we got to remove the temptation, but the best thing is to train those who are irritating and those who are irritated. Now, just as sure as I want to study the things, this is first and foremost, I want to know what it is about me that irritates other people. Now, I'm not leaving a suggestion box in the church for your benefit. Okay? And I'm not asking you to come to the back of the auditorium when the service is over and say, so you want to know, do you? As you pull out your 5-subject notepad, I've been writing these things down. Here you go. Well, in fact, better yet, let me tell you about them. No, I don't want to know that. Maybe I do, but anyway, that's not really what I mean. What I mean is I want to find out what it is. I want to be sensitive to things that irritate. And if I irritate somebody so much that they can't handle it and they tell me, I want to mark that in my life. I want to mark the one that's being offensive and causing division. And I want to fix that. I want to fix me. I want to have that spirit and attitude about everybody in this room. Fix me, not them. Now, it doesn't mean I compromise what's right. Doesn't mean I change truth. Doesn't mean I stop doing what God tells me to do. But it does mean that I can stop doing what God tells me to do in an irritating way. Let's just remove the temptation. Or no. Let there be no strife. Number 2, listen to it again. Discover what it is about you that irritates your friend, and what it is about your friend that irritates you. Now here's the other side of that. If I know something about Brother Mike that irritates me, I don't want to bring that up. I don't want to let that be an irritant to me. I don't want to go around preaching to Brother Mike every time I see him. Did you ever fix that yet? Did you take care of that problem? He said, it's not me. And, we have fun with it. But I use Brother Mike because, Brother Mike, he's not offending or irritating to anybody, is he? Nobody would raise their hand except Eric, which raises his hand on everything. But seriously, if I know something about somebody that irritates me, I will try my best to not bring up that situation where that's going to be an irritant to me. If I know if it irritates Brother Mike, or if Brother Mike irritates me how he drives, I'm not going to travel anywhere with Brother Mike. Okay? Goofy illustrations. You realize if I tell you real life illustrations, you know who I'm talking about. We're a small family here. If I start telling you all the things that irritate me about Melody, every one of us would stand up and testify and say, yeah, me too. And so I can't name names and actual things that Melody does on a regular basis. I have to be nice tonight. So number three, don't miss these so far. Do not rely on doing better. There's some things that just don't mix. We need to fix the problem. We either need to remove the temptation or fix the problem. Figure out what it is about them that irritates you and avoid that situation best you can. Face it with frank reality. Number three, stay away from circumstances that cause the irritation. I remember a story about going to Grandpa's. And Daddy was had a stomach ache. And we go to Grandpa's house, and how many of you remember what something awful, I don't even know if it's on the market today, they still sell Alka-Seltzer?
Yeah.
Oh, that's the awfulest thing in the universe.
Right.
Plop, plop, fizz, fizz, oh, what a relief it is. That was the commercials years go by, right? And I don't know, I don't watch TV, but if it's still out there today, if they still have the same theme, it's never been a relief to me. I never could handle Alka-Seltzer, but my dad, he drank those things. He ate those. He put them in the cup like the commercial showed. He'd watch them fizz, and he'd drink that thing while it's fizzing. And I guess that's how you're supposed to do it. I don't know if that is or not. He also ate pickled herring, and no person right with God would ever eat pickled herring. And strawberry rhubarb. Ugh. And anyway, never mind. Everything else about my dad I liked, but those two things irritated me. But anyway, just kidding. So Dad would take that Alka-Seltzer. Well, I remember him asking Grandma, can I have some Alka-Seltzer? Grandma said no. Said, I don't have any. Well, it wasn't too long. I don't know why Dad would do this, but he went in the kitchen and he found Alka-Seltzer. And now listen, if that were you, what would you do in that situation? My dad didn't do what you would do. My dad come in and says, hey, Brother Paul, would you do something like that? Hey, look, you said you didn't have any of this.
Nope.
You know what Grandma said? It's not mine. I don't have any. That's Grandpa's. Now why would you tell me either you don't have any Alka-Seltzer, but Grandpa has? Why didn't you just tell me Grandpa? Well, there's a problem there. You see, Grandpa and Grandma argued all the time about the lid on the Alka-Seltzer jar. I don't have an Alka-Seltzer jar. I could show you. I don't know how they were made back then or anything, but they had a problem how they stored that thing and put those tablets away, and they're always arguing about it. My brother and Mrs. Howes had a problem with that, with the ketchup. And he'd come to the table and he'd talk about it, and he'd take that bottle of ketchup and he'd shake it like this, like nobody's business. Shake, because he couldn't stand that water that would leak out of that thing if he didn't shake it up first. You know, if you buy Heinz 57, that doesn't happen. But anyway, he'd shake that thing up, and he'd say, problem with that, and this is funny because it comes to the sermon, but the problem with that is Mrs. Howes always had a problem where she never screwed the lids on anything. Can you see it happening yet? He says, so sure enough, she didn't put the lid on it, and he did, and she did what irritated him, if you will, and then he did what irritated her, and he started shaking that, and the ketchup just started flying. He didn't see it right away. He shook it 4 or 5 times before he realized he had just needed to repaint the whole living room ceiling, or kitchen ceiling, and it was all over the fridge, all over the wall, all over everything by the time he realized what he did. Now that's irritating. So check this out. So Grandma and Grandpa, how many years ago would this be? I don't know. They figured out that if they didn't want to continually fight each other about putting the lid on the Alka-Seltzer jar, we would buy our own Alka-Seltzers. You say, preacher, that's stupid. Okay, you can call it what you want. I think it's pretty smart. If you can figure out a way to avoid problems. How many of you live with someone who always leaves a ring on the bathtub? Irritating. How hard is that to wipe that ring? And that's what you'll say to them, because that irritates you. And that's irritating about them. Or you could just go, if it's so easy to wipe it off, you could just go wipe it off and avoid the strife. What should you do? We should train them. Now listen, if you leave the ring on a bathtub, listen to me tonight, stop doing that. You're irritating somebody. Somebody's got to clean that thing off. If you're the one that cleans it off, fine. But if you don't clean it off before the next person uses it, do something about it. Quit being irritating. Don't remove the temptation, train the child. I'm all for that. That's the first and best thing. Abram, leave Lot there. Obey God and do everything perfectly right. But you know what? People don't do everything perfectly right. And when there's problems and there's divisions and offenses, we've got a choice. What are we going to do? Well, we mark that. We avoid that. Or avoid them. Obviously, we can all see the problem with avoiding people. So stay away from circumstances that cause the irritation. It's pretty simple. Sometimes we just need to buy 2 jars of Alka-Seltzer. Or maybe we need to stop squeezing the toothpaste in the middle. How many of you, that's your pet peeve? Anybody? Yeah, a couple. That's a real popular one, real common one. You can't stand it. Why? Well, when you're a kid, it doesn't matter. Because you don't care about using all the toothpaste before you throw the old one away and buy a new one. Because you don't buy it. Right? But when you become your own adult and you get in your own apartment, you don't squeeze it in the middle anymore. You squeeze it from the end. You get every drop, and when you're done, you take a knife and you cut that thing open and you peel that foil back and you wipe your toothbrush in there to get every single dime of toothpaste out of there, because you're going to have to buy a new one. How many of you have been there where I'm talking about you've done that right? And so that's one thing. How many of you irritates you which side the toilet paper rolls off the roll in the house, right? Yeah, the more hands there.
Preacher.
There's a way that ought to be done, and then there's the way everyone else does it. And that's so true. That's so true. Now what do? Well, if you do it the irritating way, stop doing it that way. Which way is right? That's the way that's right. The way that doesn't irritate everybody. And if you're the one that it's always a problem, let me give you some simple advice. Go change it around when you see it. When you find the toothpaste and squeeze in the middle, and if you got kids, that it's not just squeezed in the middle, but it's all over the lavatory, it's all over the faucet, there's clumps of it because they put it in their mouth and they spit it out before they brushed all their teeth, and so there's a big clump. How many you've been there, you have children, and there's a big clump of it down in the basin, right? Now listen, train the child. I think that's very important. Train your children. Don't make their beds and don't do all their jobs for them, and don't be making life a welfare state for our children. Let's not have that. Let's teach our children character and manners. Let's teach them not to belch in public and not to make other body sounds in public, because that's disgusting. Let's teach our children manners and train them right way and discipline them if they don't do it right, because those are important. They'll affect them all their lives. And there will be people that avoid them if they don't have proper manners. But in the meantime, when you're dealing with somebody and you run across that person, now they're a grown adult, maybe somebody didn't train them. You've got to have a whole different outlook sometimes. God's people are supposed to be patient, be kind one to another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, even as God, for Christ's sake, hath forgiven you. Yes, simple thought tonight. A couple simple points that I have in my notes that I don't want to waste. Listen to me carefully. There are some people you can work with, but you can't play with them. You ever met somebody like that? Yes, sir. You can work with them, you can get things done, but you can't play with them. Some people you can play with, but you can't work with. Right. When it comes time to get something done, that's not the person. I come to another illustration I think of. I was in Denver, Colorado. I was studying at the Precision Measurement Equipment Lab school there at Aurora at Lowry Air Force Base. And the Marine detachment was just one of many detachments there at the base. It was an Air Force base. And so they had detachments from the Army, the Navy, and Coast Guard was there. Even folks from Turkey were there, and officers, and I've told you a little bit about it before. But the Marine detachment was pretty small, so there weren't a whole lot of us. In one of my classes, there was just me and John. just John and I. Now John was lazy. Now, no place for a lazy Marine. But John was a reservist. If you were a Marine tonight, you'd laugh about that because they always made fun of the reservists. But John was a weekend warrior, as they called him. Right? They made fun of the weekend warriors. Now, John wasn't a reservist yet. He was going to be a reservist. But in the meantime, he's got to be trained just like the rest of us. And we're sitting in this class, and every day of the week in this class, I forget what it was, transistor theory. But whatever this class was, in the transistor theory class, there was all of the attendees, and there were 2 Marines in there, and the Marines were to empty the trash on every Thursday, whatever the day was, I don't remember. But there was one day of the week that the Marines did it, one day of the week that the Army did it, and there were only 2 of us. Guess which one of us did it every time?
John.
It wasn't John. Bad guess. It wasn't John. Now, I'm not puffing up my horn because you don't know the rest of the story. I made a big mistake. One day, now you see, I was the Martha. I was the cleaning up, right? Don't call me Martha. I was the Martha. I was the cleaning up. Mary was the one that was entertaining Jesus, except for John was entertaining the whole rest of the class. John was a jokester, and he was a great guy. I still remember he's a good friend. He was my roommate, my bunkmate, if you will. In my we didn't have dorms. In my barracks, he was on the upper rack, and I was on the opposite side in a single rack, and then Mike was on the other rack, and so the 3 of us were in the barracks together. So John and I were pretty close. But I got irritated with John. And John never cleaned up. Here's my mistake. I told him about it. In front of everybody. I just lost my temper. And church, would you agree with me tonight? He should have shared his responsibility. He should have taken and did his part. No doubt about that. No one would argue with that. But sometimes when you react, you overreact. I proceeded to tell John that he was no good, never been no good, never had a good father, never had a good mother, nobody ever trained him right, he never developed any manners, he never had anybody train him the right way, he never would be, that he was overweight, obese, and he had no business being in the Marine Corps, he was a disgrace to the Marine Corps, and there's no way he ought to be in the same class as us. I don't know how he ever followed through with boot camp, how he ever got here, and that's about the speech that I made, and guess who everybody liked, and guess who everybody hated? You got it. Nobody appreciated my speech at all. John didn't appreciate it one lick. But I didn't win any friends. I didn't influence anybody. And I hadn't even read the book yet. But I did not do well. I'm just confessing that to you tonight. John was fire. I was gasoline. We didn't mix. We could play together. John was great to play with, but we couldn't work together. And you got to learn this about people. How many of you know somebody, don't name anybody, how many of you know somebody tonight, what am I going to say, that's very strongly opinionated, right? They're very, very strong opinions. And they'll tell you in a moment, that's what strongly opinionated people usually do. They'll tell you what they think about everything. You don't have to ask them. They'll just come up and they'll blurt it out. No matter how harsh it is, no matter how rude it is, their opinion is all that's important, and you need to know their opinion. Let me help you. 2 strongly opinionated people should never share their opinion. Right. Every time it's going to be fire and gasoline. And so there's some people you can work with and not play with, some people you can play with but don't work with. And you know, there's some things you can do, but you have to mark them and avoid them. You have to learn. There's some people you can be with for a short time, but not a long time. There are some people with whom certain subjects cause strife and stress. And in those situations, the best thing for you to do is to not fix them on those subjects. You can't say, No. No, Paul. You can't say that. You disagree with them in politics. You disagree with them on their opinion of some political figure or some news media figure. You're not going to fix them.
Sure.
Avoid them. Mark them. Avoid them. But you don't have to avoid the person as much as the offense sometimes. And you realize if I don't talk about that person in front of them, we don't have that problem today. Listen, this will help a marriage to be better. This will help a situation at work to be a better situation at work. This will help situations in our homes between siblings that fight all the time, between siblings that fight once in a while about that one thing. This will help situations where parents and children have a constant strife in the home, where moms and dads have strife with each other. Hopefully they've learned that before the children come along. Remember, children will always exaggerate whatever condition the marriage already is. You got a good marriage, children make it better. You got a rocky marriage, children make it more rocky. And so, very, 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 very thought-filled there. But, and then, of course, if you don't mind me saying, the ultimate. This will change church.
Sure.
A church can grow. There's times in the church where somebody could be as offensive and divisive and irritating to the point where the only way to handle it is to remove the temptation. You don't want to do that. You don't want to do that. So fix that. In the meantime, until that ever has to happen, let's the rest of us avoid that irritation the best that we can. Whoever it is. Don't think of one person. That's rude. Think of all of us. There's something about me that irritates you. Well, forgive me. If I learn about it, I'll try not to be that irritated. If there's something about you that irritates me, I'll try not to bring that subject up so I don't irritate you and you don't irritate me. Just avoid these things, these subjects. I know a guy. Every time he and his wife has an argument, he says this: "You're just like your mother." Okay, how do you spell stupid? Whatever that guy's name is how you spell stupid, right? That's just stupid. You shouldn't say stupid. I'm sorry. That's just stupid. That's just dumb. That's not too bright. But you know why he does it? Because he knows that's her button. He knows that's what, some of us, we're so blatant about it. We know it irritates people, so that's the button we'll press. Abraham and Lot had a problem. Wouldn't it have been better if they didn't have the problem at all? It sure would. But problems come, don't it? And problems are oftentimes in our lives because of a disobedience, because of some situation that didn't have to be there, but we've allowed it to come, and it's there now, and now we have to deal with it. Right. Not all things, but many, many things are like that. Sure. Some sin, some problem, some undeveloped area of our life or theirs, and we come across this problem. When we come across this problem, Abram was gracious about it. However you want to do this, you can take this side or this side, I don't care, but let there be no strife. And let's separate. And they got away from one another. Problems happened. I know that. Look well into the problem and into the rest of the story. We know what Lot did and the problems Lot ran into. But there was no more strife. Does that sound silly to say? The problem at hand was solved. Okay. I'm done tonight. There's some people who work better when you talk to them by a note. And there's some people who work better when you speak to them face to face. I think there's just some times in our life where it'd just be easier to buy another bottle of Alka-Seltzer. It'd just be easier to buy a separate tube of toothpaste. Maybe even hang another roll of toilet paper on the wall if you have to. My preacher used to talk about, I'll give this and I'm done. My preacher used to talk about disciplining their children. And he'd say, when the missus disciplined the children, I think she pulled out Grandma's padded paddle and just said, "Now, honey, don't do that again," and tap them on the backside and says, now don't do that again. And it would irritate him. When he did it, it irritated her. Because she would tell the story that it wasn't the padded paddle and the honey, don't do that again. It was an axe. It was the executioner's axe. It was the guillotine. It was death by discipline. Because he was abusive and he was... Now he wasn't. Just so you know the facts, because I'm not for that. And boy, I'll tell you, I can't stand that. I can't stand physical abuse. I think it's physical abuse to not spank children. I think it's physical abuse to spank them wrongly or when you're angry too. So there's an art to it. But what did they do? When the missus would go out and discipline the children, the preacher would take a walk around the block. When he disciplined the children, the missus would take a walk around the block. And they avoided the obvious irritation that happened when each of them did what was irritating to the other. You decide, church, in every situation, fix me, not them. That's my advice to you. Fix yourself. Make that right so you're not irritating to anybody and so the problem doesn't have to exist. If it's a matter of right and wrong, always do the right thing. Never satisfy yourself by giving some kind of circumstance or some kind of concession to yourself and saying, it's okay for me to be this way because of my past, or because of this situation in my life, or because of this or that. No, don't give concessions for sin. Sin is sin. Wrong is wrong. It's always wrong. It'll never be right. And you can't even do right, or can't even do wrong with an expectation to do right later. You can't do something wrong in order to do right later. You can't. Don't mix fire and gasoline. It'll always blow up. Don't try to mix oil and water. Those compromise areas where, again, what my preacher used to say, he said, my wife and I couldn't agree on the color of the carpet. She wanted yellow, I wanted blue. We compromised and got yellow. Smart man. Smart man. Let's stand for prayer. Dear Lord, tonight, forgive me for just a simple message. Lord, if I need forgiving for such a thing, Lord, I've tried to just give my heart. I've tried to address a subject in the most sensitive and yet biblical way that I know how to do. Lord, I don't want separation in our church. Lord, we need every soul, and we love every one of us. Every single one that's here, I love them. And I want them to have a long time, a long life with our church. But Lord, I also don't want there to be irritants and divisions and strife among us. And so I see that something has to be done. We can't just let it go. We can't. We can try to just be better, but we're not going to do that. So the problem has to be fixed. I pray tonight for everyone in this room tonight that they know something about themselves that others don't exactly appreciate, to put it kindly. Lord, give them the strength, the thought, the wisdom to fix the problem. Lord, in the meantime, give each of us patience, wisdom, discernment, and understanding. As Solomon of old prayed to you, Lord, give us wisdom to judge so great a people. Lord, everyone in this room has potential to do something great for God. Everyone does. I want to help them reach their potential for you. I want them to stand with me one day, if that's your will, before the judgment seat of Christ and answer together and give account for one another that we tried to do the right thing, and hopefully that we did. Bless tonight the invitation as we look at something very simple and practical and hopefully helpful based on how we handle it. Thank you, Lord, for the message and for the truths that we see in this little story. In Jesus' name we pray it. Amen. The piano play, please. Invitation's open. How about you? A simple invitation anybody can respond to. I want to be a blessing to those around me. Lord, help me to be so. Help me to look inside and remove the temptation that others have to be irritated. or a problem that I might have that I don't even know I have. Lord, help me. Let there be no strife. Abram said unto Lot, let there be no strife, I pray thee, between me and thee, and between my herdmen and thy herdmen, for we be brethren. Church, tonight, we be brethren. We're brothers and sisters around here. We're part of a family of God. Paul said to the church at Rome, I beseech you, brethren, see it here again, mark them which cause divisions and offenses contrary to the doctrine which ye have learned, and avoid them. Doctrine is simple, it's teaching. It doesn't mean it's some kind of fundamental doctrine that somebody's being contrary to. It's just simple teaching that you've learned. You've learned to have these manners. You've learned not to have these kind of mannerisms. If it's contrary to what you've learned, avoid them. We're together like a family, at least 3 times a week, and for at least an hour each time, sometimes an hour and a half, minimum, throughout this every day. And some of us are together every single day. Yes, familiarity breeds contempt. And it's irritating. We have something we can do about it. Amen. Thank you, Miss Angela. Amen. Brother Paul, do we have a choir practice tonight?
Teen choir.
Teen choir. All right, teens. Heed the call, please. Thank you for cooperating. I love our teen choir. I love our teenagers, that's why. Amen. We're blessed to have some good teens, aren't we, Sarah? Yeah, I asked one of them. All right, I don't know why Andrew's shaking his head no back there. I'm sure he didn't mean you. He didn't really do that. I'm just irritating. All right, amen. Thank you for coming. God bless you, Brother Mark. You be careful on the roads. And he travels a lot. You all remember Brother Mark in your prayers for his travels. We appreciate you being here with us again tonight. And Brother Paul, let me ask you to close us in prayer. Thank you.
Dear Heavenly Father, again, we're thankful to be able to be here today, Lord. I pray that you would just keep us safe as we go on our way home. I pray, Lord, you just bless this week. Bless this message to our hearts. Help it to make a difference in our lives. And I pray, Lord, that you just keep us safe and bless us this week. Thank you. Amen.